Today, we are diving deep into the architecture of modern life, really, focusing on this phenomenon that shapes how most of us live, yet often goes unnamed, the Zwischenstadt.
That's right. The Zwischenstadt, it's German for the in-between city, and it really captures the complex reality of our built environment today.
So, not the neat, compact city we often imagine.
No, definitely not. Think more of a huge conurbation, like a
Yeah.
vast region with towns, developments all clustered together, forming this kind of interconnected city web linked by roads, rail,
An
everything.
in-between state.
Exactly, between, a specific place and the wider world, between physical space and abstract time, even between the traditional ideas of city and country.
Okay, so our mission here is to get past that sort of nostalgic myth of the compact city and really understand how planning, design, and importantly, how your daily life actually functions in this, well, fragmented reality.
And that difficulty in understanding, that's the paradox, isn't it? The sources we looked at are pretty clear. The old compact city ideal is just not feasible anymore, environmentally or socially, for the vast numbers of people living in these spread out areas.
But our planning systems haven't caught up.
Not really. They're often divided, politically, geographically into these small, separate jurisdictions. They really struggle to manage this huge regional urban form.
So instead of working together,
They end up competing fiercely, often in ways that are actually counterproductive for the region as a whole.
wow, when you think about the scale of it, it's pretty mind-blowing. And what's fascinating is how long ago people saw this coming.
Yeah, that's wild.
Like H.G. Wells, way back in 1902, in his book Anticipations, he basically predicted this massive diffusion, this spreading out of cities.
He did. He argued these new settlements, quote, will not be in the old sense cities at all.
And that the old separation city versus country would just kind of dissolve, the boundaries would disappear altogether.
Here. He absolutely nailed our current reality, didn't he? This continuum of built-up areas and open spaces, all connected by networks. But almost immediately, there was this powerful counter-idea.
Ah, Ebenezer Howard.
Exactly. His Garden City ideal from 1898. Howard was reacting against that potential sprawl. He explicitly wanted to save the traditional countryside by creating very defined, bounded towns.
And that idea, the bounded city, it's had a huge influence ever since, right?
Oh, absolutely. You see it in the UK's post-war new towns policy. You even see echoes in modern stuff like new urbanism in the US, which tries to, well, artificially recreate the feel of old towns.
But despite all that effort,
Despite all that, cities mostly grew just like Wells predicted, spread out, networked.
okay, so if we think about how this happened, the Zwischenstadt isn't down to one big planning mistake.
No, not at all. It's more like evolution. It comes from countless individual, perfectly rational decisions.
Like what?
Well, maybe a new road gets built. Suddenly, it's cheaper to put a factory out on the edge. That factory attracts workers, so houses go up. Then you need schools, shops. It snowballs.
Or just families looking for more space.
Right. Or people wanting affordable homes, maybe bigger yards, but still needing access to city jobs and wanting to be near the countryside. It's a cumulative effect.
And the sources point out this kind of structure pops up everywhere, globally, even if the reasons behind it are totally different.
Yeah, that's striking. You might have heavy industry driving it in one place, like post-war Europe, or maybe overpopulation pressures in parts of Asia. Or in the US, huge private investment pouring into specialized suburbs.
But the result looks similar.
Structurally, yes.
Yeah.
You get this pervasive, spread out urban form. And it develops its own kind of independence from the original city core.
Characterized by specialized zones.
Exactly. Functionally specific areas, all defined by the networks connecting them, roads, internet, supply chains, often without any single clear traditional downtown center.
Okay, so understanding that history, that kind of organic dispersed growth, it forces us to look again at the old ideas of what makes a good city, because they seem to just fail to describe this reality.
They really do. Let's start with the whole concept of urbanness itself.
What do you mean?
Well, it's crucial we stop confusing the look of urbanness. The brick facades, the crowded streets, the hustle and bustle with social urbanness.
Which is more about
Tolerance, maybe. Cosmopolitanism, civic curiosity, that kind of thing. People often complain about the loss of busy street life in, say, European cities.
Yeah, you hear that a lot, a decline in public life.
Right, but the source argues this isn't necessarily some kind of cultural failure.
Okay, but hold on. Isn't there a cost? Aren't we
Right.
trading that public vitality, those random encounters you only get on a busy street,
For just a
private isolation?
That's definitely the tension. But the argument is that disappearance of intense street life. It's partly a direct result of better living conditions. Activities that had to happen in public or semi-public spaces because homes were cramped, like big family gatherings, messy hobbies, whatever they've moved into larger, more comfortable private homes or into hyper-specialized places.
Like cinemas, big gyms, private clubs.
Exactly. The function, the activity, it still happens, but its location is now specialized, maybe privatized, internalized within these specific zones or buildings.
Okay. And the idea of the city's structure is also outdated. We used to think of it like a tree.
Sort of, yeah. A hierarchical tree structure, one main trunk, the city center, and then branches of subcenters. That was the model.
With the Zwischenstadt is different.
Completely. It's much better understood as a network with nodes. The trend, overwhelmingly, is the dismantling of those old spatial hierarchies. It's all about distributed specialization now.
The single center is gone. It's a collection of many specialized centers.
Precisely. And then think about the constant push for density.
Right. Build high, build close together, save land.
Yeah, people argue for high-density housing mainly to save land. But if you actually look at the math, the return is surprisingly small. We have to be clear about different kinds of density. Material, visual, social.
Right.
If you take residential density and increase it by half, which is a big change architecturally and socially, you typically only save about 10 to 12% of the overall settlement land.
Wait, hang on. Only 10 to 12%. You're saying we make these huge changes to how people live, maybe making their environment worse, needing tons of parking.
Often paving over almost everything.
Right. And all that disruption saves maybe 10% of the land. That
Yeah.
sounds like a really bad trade-off, like a failed policy metric.
It often is, especially when you hit certain physical limits. The discussion brings up the plot ratio, that's the total floor area versus the plot size. Once that ratio gets above about 0.8,
Meaning the building covers 80% of the ground?
yeah, or the total floor area is 80% of the plot area spread over floors. Once you get past that point, the site is almost completely built over. You have to pave everything else for parking, access roads. It seriously degrades the quality of life there.
And you're still not saving much more land beyond that initial 10, 12%.
Exactly. You're sacrificing quality for very marginal statistical gains.
Okay. And similarly, that other big planning ideal, mixed use. Living, working, shopping all in the same block. It sounds great. Everyone loves the idea, but it seems really hard to actually achieve today. Why is that?
Well, again, it comes down to specialization and economics, really.
Yeah.
Economies of scale. Big retailers push out small shops. High land prices make it impossible for, say, small workshops or less profitable uses to survive in desirable spots.
So the idea of a 19th century mixed-use block, that wasn't just good planning, it was economic reality.
Pretty much. The source argues that the successful mixed-use building back then worked because of internal financial differences within the building itself.
What do you mean? Like the fancy shop or apartment face the street?
Right. The prime spot, the front building, the lower floors, they commanded high rent. But the back building, the upper floors, the basement, those could be rented out more cheaply to different tenants or used for workshops, storage.
So the building itself allowed for different economic levels side by side.
Precisely. That complex internal socio-economic setup, which allowed a mix of uses based on varying rent capacities within one structure, that's largely gone now, so trying to force mixed use through planning often just doesn't pencil out economically.
Wow, okay. That really reframes things. Which brings us to, how does this fragmented, specialized structure actually play out in your daily life? The sources talk about system versus agora.
Right. The Zwischenstadt is heavily dominated by the system. Think of the system as the rational, often globalized structure. Specialized production, consumption, abstract communication, logistics.
The big box stores, the office parks, the regional hospital.
Exactly. It allows for all these incredibly diverse, specialized spaces and activities, but it fundamentally relies on and basically presupposes you have access to a car.
Okay, that's the system. And the agora.
The agora is the other side. It's your local, place-specific living space. Your neighborhood, maybe. It's critical for face-to-face interactions, for just perceiving reality directly, for community building.
That's where local culture happens. Solidarity.
Potentially, yes. That's the space for it.
So if I think about my own Saturday,
Yeah.
driving, say, 20 minutes to a specialized climbing gym, then another 15 to a specific shopping center,
Mm-hmm.
And that was all interacting with the system.
Almost entirely, yes.
But the maybe 15 minutes I spend walking around my immediate block, chatting with a neighbor, going to the local park,
Yeah.
that's the agora bit.
Exactly. And the consequence, the danger that the source points out, is that daily life becomes increasingly insular.
How so?
Well, think about it. Life gets organized into these specialized islands. Home, office, school, the specific gym or club you go to. And these islands, they're primarily connected by traffic routes, by car
A
journeys.
star-shaped pattern almost, from home outwards.
Right, and that isolates people. It makes just moving around potentially dangerous for kids. And it actively excludes a huge chunk of the population, maybe over half, who don't have easy access to a car. Think about the elderly, the poor young people.
Right. So if we're judging the Zwischenstadt, its quality isn't just about efficiency or the system. It has to be measured by how well it supports its agora function, how well it works for those marginalized people.
Absolutely. Especially for children, the elderly, the handicapped. And that means we urgently need new forms of transport, something to fill that huge gap between the private car, which dominates, and conventional mass public transit.
Which often doesn't work well in low-density, spread-out areas.
Exactly. You can't run frequent buses everywhere, so we need more flexible, maybe on-demand, specialized transit solutions to try and reconnect those islands for everyone.
Okay. So what does all this mean for planners, for designers? The source suggests the city is actually quite changeable, but only through lots of small, continuous adjustments like 2 to 5% change per year. Big, disruptive projects aren't necessarily the answer.
Seems not. If that's the case, the focus for design strategy needs a pretty radical shift.
Away from just economics.
Yes, away from purely economic goals, because frankly, basic economic functions can happen almost anywhere now. The real competitive advantage, the real draw for a place in the future, it's going to be cultural and ecological qualities.
Things you can't just replicate anywhere else.
Exactly. Unique, place-specific things. Cultural richness, a strong local history, maybe preserved landscape beauty, a distinct character. Those will become the most important economic attractors.
But appreciating those things requires a different way of seeing the landscape, doesn't it? Especially in these messy, in-between areas.
It really does. Planners, designers, even just residents. We need to develop what the source calls paraesthetics.
Paraesthetics.
Yeah, like a sensitivity to the edges, the transition points between what we traditionally think of as beautiful and ugly, a willingness to actually perceive and maybe even value the often ignored bits of the urban landscape.
Like infrastructure.
Yeah.
Old industrial sites.
Precisely, the stuff we usually tune out.
And there are fantastic examples of this approach working, right?
Yeah.
The sources mentioned the Emscher Park project in Germany's Ruhr area.
A brilliant example. They deliberately focused on transforming that post-industrial landscape, finding value in its unique, maybe challenging character.
Like the gasometer in Oberhausen, taking this huge industrial structure.
Yeah, this thing wasn't seen as an ungainly monster.
And turning it into a landmark, a cultural center, an exhibition space, something totally unique and unmistakable.
Exactly. And that kind of transformation, alongside other things they did, like land art, huge graphics on fields, sculptures on old slag heaps, it was all designed to create these strong, visual, region-wide landmarks.
To make the whole area more legible, more memorable.
Yes, to give some shape, some identity, some meaning to what might otherwise feel like just formless sprawl. It increases the legibility of the Zwischenstadt as a whole.
Which brings us back to Kevin Lynch, doesn't it?
Yeah.
His classic work on the image of the city.
Absolutely. Lynch's ideas are key here. Legibility comes from both hard factors, the physical stuff like paths, nodes, districts, landmarks, and soft factors.
Like perception memory?
Yeah, perception, memory, association, stories. And perception gets stronger, more intense, the more senses you involve. Sight, obviously, but also smell, sound, the memory of events that happen there.
So cultivating those sensory layers is how you build a meaningful cultural landscape out of, well, scattered infrastructure and specialized zones.
That's the idea. You're building meaning and connection.
So wrapping this part up, the core strategy for planning isn't about somehow stopping this dispersed growth, which seems politically impossible anyway. It's more about accepting uncertainty.
Yeah, accepting uncertainty and designing with, as the source puts it, open space for hope. Meaning you cultivate the urban landscape using softer tools, culture, art, sport, community events, and crucially, you maintain fallow land.
Empty lots, undeveloped areas.
Yes, keep some land deliberately vacant. As breathing space for nature, sure, but also as essential room for maneuver, flexibility for people, for businesses, for unforeseen needs in the future.
So it's like designing for adaptability, for creative reuse, instead of locking everything into a rigid, predetermined function.
Exactly. Form follows fantasy or maybe follows adaptation rather than just function.
Okay, that feels like a good place to wrap up our deep dive into the Zwischenstadt. The main takeaway for you, listening, seems
Yeah.
to be this diffuse, fragmented urban region most of us live in. It's not necessarily a planning failure.
No, it's a new kind of reality, a complex, emergent cultural landscape, and it demands totally new ways of thinking, politically and aesthetically. We really need to move beyond clinging to the myth of the compact city.
Because that ship has sailed.
Pretty much. And this urban condition, this fate, it's shared globally now. The real borders, the meaningful divides between rich and poor, they increasingly run through cities within these regions, not just between a rich north and a poor south.
So this new reality forces us all to ask, how do we actually foster local self-determination? How do we build community that agora in a world that feels increasingly dominated by the competitive, often abstract, and sometimes isolating global system?
That's the fundamental challenge.
Right. And given how individualized our societies have become, maybe how fragile the traditional social safety net feels. And here's a final thought for you to chew on. As the structure of your own urban life perhaps isolates you in these specialized islands of activity, what's your part? What's your responsibility in maybe making your own fragmented region more legible, more connected? And looking ahead, what new kinds of local connection, what forms of solidarity might be absolutely essential for navigating the inevitable ecological and economic bumps in the road to come? You might just need to start building your own agora.